Recently, I posted a video examining how a Radeon 7750 with a single gigabyte of video memory was able to run Battlefield 1. I did this more or less just to prove how overestimated Battlefield 1's system requirements were. However, in that video we ran into quite a number of hiccups, and after some research and replies in a Linus Tech Tips thread I created, it's likely the limiting factor and the source of the hiccups were not a lack of video memory, but just the fact that 7750 was paired up with an Intel i3-2120, a dual-core processor. Now, because it's a hyper-threaded CPU, it does have the available number of CPU threads necessary to run Battlefield 1 at a bare minimum. However, BF1 is really designed to have each of its processing threads run across an independent core, as some processing threads run into issues sharing cores, as with the i3-2120. The system requirements reflect this fully. There are a number of hacks and fixes to make Battlefield 1 run much smoother on these hyper-threaded dual cores, but the point of this video is to re-examine the Radeon 7750, this time paired up with a proper quad-core CPU, in this case my i5 4690K. With this Radeon 7750 in my personal system, with drivers refreshed, let's take another look at the practicality of running Battlefield 1 on a 1GB video card. As a start, these are the full system specs of this test. As previously mentioned, we are using a Gigabyte Radeon 7750 with 1GB of GDDR5 memory, factory overclocked to 880 MHz on the GPU and 4500 MHz effective for the memory, leading to 901 theoretical GFLOPS of compute, and along with that 72 GB of memory bandwidth respectively. Drivers are AMD's latest Crimson 16.11.2. Because of the newfound processing power this Radeon 7750 is going to be paired with, I elected to use an internal recording solution because 1, I don't have an external recording device like an Elgato HD60, and 2, using a phone or camera doesn't really show any of the on-screen details that well. I'm using Open Broadcasting System, which allows me to use the i5 4690K's quick sync video encoding feature that frees up the CPU immensely for internal recording, but can and sometimes does introduce frame time and lag issues. Realistically, the Radeon 7750 by far should be our limiting factor, and we should still get a very realistic picture of how it performs. I'm going to start out with 1080p all lowest settings on Empire's Edge, a personal favorite of BF1's multiplayer maps. Immediately, the 7750 starts handing in similar performance to how it ran with the i3-2120, but without the game-breaking hiccups. Just to reiterate here, despite the uneven pace of the recorded video, the frame time and lag was not as pronounced as it seems. Without recording, it's completely playable and quite smooth. With MSI Afterburner statistics running there at the top to the left, we can get a pretty accurate picture on how this game is running on the system. As I completely expected, almost all of our video memory is in use at the moment, and our CPU is pretty well bogged down by both this game and the fact that it is recording at the same time, but it isn't at 100% usage like the i3-2120 was in the other system. And because of that, we are not getting any of those game-breaking hiccups that i3-2120 was giving us. Now, we can't completely blame that processor, we just gotta deal with the fact that this is how this game was designed. With Battlefield 1 designed the way it is, other games will likely follow suit quite soon, meaning that dual cores for gaming have pretty much hit obsolescence. The ironic thing being that it's not that the dual cores don't have enough performance to play these games, it's that developers are expecting gamers to have quad-core processors, and by suit, each of those threads will have its own independent processor to execute on. Ironically, the more cores meme does have some validity here, but that really has more to do with the fact that the current consoles use really weak CPU cores in a bunch of them. Even that old Sandy Bridge dual-core i3-2120 that we keep moving back to really is as powerful as either the CPU arrays in the Xbox One or PlayStation 4. But times change, and of course processing environments change, as well as what developers expect PC gamers to have in their systems. Interestingly enough, I think a really good comparison point is the fact that if we look back at Battlefield 4, which yes, is a 3-year-old game, but runs beautifully on that i3-2120. Realistically, Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1 really are not that different. To me, Battlefield 1 in many ways is just a reskin. Because DICE did not have to cater to the Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3, I do feel that their engine was not as limited as it was in Battlefield 4. It is fairly obvious that Battlefield 1, like I said, is just simply not as held back, and DICE could just pretty much up the ante on everything and not have to worry about full generation systems. Good God, boy did I get off topic there. Well, let's actually talk about the Radeon 7750 and this game. At this point in the video, we can see that I did drop the resolution down to 720p, and accordingly, our FPS increases immensely. The 7750 is completely our bottleneck at this point, as well as the fact that it only has a gigabyte of video memory. However, just like in our last instance in testing this video card with this game, and its lacking amount of video memory, I am still quite surprised the fact that the game does boot up on a gigabyte of video memory, regardless of GPU. I think we gotta hand it to DICE once again. They very well optimized this game, even though they designed it for 2 GB video cards. It's pretty damn obvious it runs just fine on 1 GB video cards, as long as we don't enable medium textures or anything super high or super crazy. As a GPU, the 7750 is well below the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 in terms of GPU compute. Specifically, it's about 2/3 as capable as an Xbox One and half as capable as a PlayStation 4. If what I know is correct, the console versions of this game, while they do not run at 1080p, they do run with a variable render resolution, but they do feature more advanced and better effects and lighting, etc, etc. Of course, the 7750 does have the ability to run up to 60 FPS if we lower all the settings to their bare minimum and give it the CPU grunt behind it to make that happen. I gotta admit though, playing at 720p is kind of visually jarring. Just the lack of detail on screen does sort of make it hard to engage enemies out to a very far distance. Of course, an increase in render resolution means an appropriate decrease in frame rate. It's up to you to decide what really matters to you when running this game on something like a Radeon 7750 or something possibly weaker, or something in the similar level of performance. For larger maps like Empire's Edge here, it's probably to your benefit to run at 1080p or something similar like 900p that gives you the added detail to engage and see targets at a much further distance. However, smaller maps like Argonne Forest or even maybe Ballroom Blitz, it might be up your alley to stick with 720p so you get that higher frame rate that's necessary for fast and furious engagements. Moving on, I did give medium settings 720p a try just to see how different the performance would be. And of course it came with an appropriate decrease in performance, but we were still well above 30. If you really gotta have those extra little bits of graphics, you can do this, it is practical, but I would still stick to a 720p render if you're gonna have higher settings. Especially with medium textures in place, I was expecting some major slowdown or some major lag time or hiccups to happen, but surprisingly it wasn't an issue. However, moving back up to 1080p, it's fairly obvious that we're getting more slowdown again. But it's still, for the most part, staying above 30. And if you're not recording a video like I was doing here, it's going to be a lot smoother than what this video is showing. That 35 FPS number that we are seeing is fairly consistent, and at 35 FPS, the game runs pretty fine. It's not a high enough average frame rate for my taste, especially when the action gets heavy and you might see dips below 30. But if you really want the added detail that you get with medium settings, you know, to a certain degree it is practical. It's probably even more practical if we were to overclock the 7750. However, that is something for another video in another time if I decide to do it. So, after revisiting the Battlefield 1 on a 1GB video card issue, it's definitely a complete well, it's not a possibility, it's completely doable. As long as we're not running on a dual-core processor, at least not an i3-2120, something newer like an i3-6100 probably runs this game perfectly fine. I don't know for sure, but I bet it does. But I think the biggest takeaway here, and this is something I say in pretty much every Radeon 7750 video that I've made, just go out and get a better graphics card. Unless you're like me and just like experimenting with stuff like this and just doing fun videos just to see what we can do with something so old or so weak that's just not really appropriate for this game. Something like an RX 460 or better yet a GTX 1050 is a much more appropriate video card for this game, and I would encourage any of you to go out and get one of those if you don't have a lot of money to spend on a new graphics card, but what you currently have is really just holding you back in your Battlefield 1 experience. Anyways, I'm going to end that here. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Thank you to my current subscribers. Thank you so much for sticking around and being there for me for my channel. And the support that I get from everyone and anyone, whether it's a liked video or subscriber, goes a long way for me. Thank you guys so much. My name is Blitz. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a good one. I will see you next time.